joining me, and thank you to all of you on X who are joining me. Let me tell you what's coming up. We'll be talking with a herbalist about what she believes the power of herbs truly is. Plus, a young man who's running from underground station to underground station to raise money for Calm. Why he's doing that, why he feels males' mental health is so important, as indeed it is. His own story, we'll be talking with him a little later. But I guess the spotlight has been very rightly on what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Gaza at the moment. We've talked with a very powerful talk, which I know has affected all of us, with our imam and our rabbi, who we've actually asked to stand by throughout the program in case we need them back in again. We may well be talking to them before the end of the show again. Also, we've talked with Julia Samuel, psychotherapist, about the effects of seeing the pictures, seeing the headlines, what the way it affects us viscerally. My next guest is one I'm very excited to talk with again. San Vaknin is Israeli. He's in Macedonia at the moment. He's a professor of clinical psychology, absolutely fascinating. And I'll tell you why he's joining me today. It's to talk about conflict, in particular, the sorts of personalities behind the Israeli-Palestine conflict at the moment. Sam, thank you so much for joining me again. Just reading through some of the notes you've sent me, I'm like, wow, this is a totally different and a really interesting take on all of this. Let me start off by asking, and I've asked all of my guests, how are you feeling? Because I don't, take lightly that you may well know people and what have you, and it would be. How are you feeling?
I have hundreds of relatives in the war zones, both in the north and the south. I haven't slept a wink for quite a few nights now, as you can see probably. So I'm not in the best of shape, but I'll give you whatever I can.
Thank you. And I know you can't even get a flight back home at the moment because
I can't get a flight back. No, Israel is actually cut off.
Yeah. When you look at the personalities, and I think there are interesting ones involved, when you look at Bibi Netanyahu, his 8th time around now, and many people are saying, pointing out that the reason he, quote unquote, took his eye off the ball is when you need power at any cost and you bring in cronies, people who will back you up. You are often displacing people who are very, very learned in their trade, in security, in the military, and what have you. You're displacing them with your buddies, your political buddies. It seems to me that the need for power underlines so much of the world's conflict, and I'm really fascinated to hear your views on this.
The diseased leadership of both the State of Israel and the Hamas, and I'm using the word diseased judiciously, definitely clinically, has to do with underlying factors which are actually not personal. Leaders reflect constituencies. The psychology of leaders resonates very closely with the psychopathology of their electorates and nations. So here we have two peoples, two nations, and they are both exhibiting what we call in psychology a trauma response. Now, we have 4 types of trauma response, and the most famous of which is fight or flight. So in this case, we have fight. Both nations are traumatized, and both are in a post-traumatic condition. As you recall, the Jewish people has just had, in historical terms, just yesterday, the Holocaust. And the Palestinians had something they called the Nakba, which means in Arabic, the catastrophe, which is the expulsion in 1948 from their territories, which now constitute the State of Israel. So they're both traumatized. And when people are traumatized, they tend to perceive themselves as victims. their victimhood becomes their identity politics. And this is called in clinical psychology competitive victimhood. No, I'm the bigger victim. No, I'm the bigger victim. And they compete for victimhood. And so when you compete for victimhood, when victimhood is who you are, you feel entitled to special treatment. You feel much less empathetic towards the other party. You feel egotistic, you're self-centered on your needs and priorities and so on and so forth, on recovery. And many, many victims, true victims, become very self-destructive. Unfortunately, in both nations, the Israelis, who are Jews, and the Palestinians, in both nations, there's a founding myth of suicide. In Israel, we have the story of Masada. Masada was the resistance in a fortress in the desert against the Roman army. And then all the fighters there committed suicide when things were looked to be, beyond hope. The Masada myth is a foundational myth of the state of Israel. Every child learns it. It's inculcated in us. And the Arabs have the concept of, the Muslims actually, have the concept of shahada. Shahada means martyrdom, to be a martyr. And to be a martyr is to die. And to commit suicide in Masada is to die. This is a death ethos, an ethos of death. These are two death cults at war. I know, not politically correct.
No, but what it speaks to then, if you have an upbringing or if you have a society through which such a message runs all the way through, your way of your dialogue, when we talk about peace dialogue, and often right from the beginning of the creation of Israel and what happened with with the 700,000 Palestinians being displaced, it was people from other cultures parachuting in to draw lines either on a map or either in the sand, with their Western no knowledge of that. This is what we need to do, right from the days of Balfour, historically going all the way through. So even Jimmy Carter. But one of the things that my husband and myself are talking about is every time there's been a leader from those groups, they've been assassinated. If they speak against that language, if they speak one of peace and hope and I guess non-victimhood, they're taken out.
Yes, that's because victimhood, as I said, is an identity politics. And like all forms of identity politics, it involves a series of psychological defense mechanisms which lead inexorably to violence. With your permission, I will enumerate these defense mechanisms without going into too much detail. The foremost mechanism is known as splitting. Splitting or dichotomous thinking simply means I'm all good, my enemy is all bad. I am perfect, whoever disagrees with me is evil and must die. This is splitting. It's a defense mechanism that operates in individuals and in collectives. Then you have paranoid ideation. It's me against the world. As a victim, I've been victimized, means the world didn't help me. So I have to rely only on myself. And all the rest of the world are potential enemies. I should be hypervigilant. There are conspiracies everywhere. That's paranoia. And then another form of defense is grandiosity, especially if you have existential anxiety, if you're not really sure that you're going to be here tomorrow, if you have true enemies who seek to exterminate you, eradicate you, displace you, whatever. One of the main defense mechanisms we have as individuals and collectives is grandiosity. It's a form of cognitive distortion. It impairs our reality testing. We don't perceive reality correctly anymore. So Israel, for example, has this misguided belief that it is untouchable, invincible, immune to the consequences of its actions. This is a form of grandiosity, of course. And of course, the other party, the Palestinians, have their own type of grandiosity. They are the perfect victims. No one has ever been victimized as they have. That renders them unique. And they're entitled to special treatment and special concessions, and they have rights that impose obligations on others. It's a form of grandiosity, entitled grandiosity. And then we have magical thinking. If we just put our minds to it, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. Our thinking, our words, our wishes and dreams and hopes, they are reality. We have absolute influence, and we can shape the cosmos around us, our environment. This is magical thinking. It's not true.
But then something like this, but then somebody takes that action that changes that friction between two similar ideologies, if you like. Somebody just steps way outside of that. I guess they have to do something horrific in order to what? Up the ante to become... I'm just thinking with the Hamas doing what they did, that is a massive upping of the horrific ante.
Yes, everything I've just described is known collectively as pathological narcissism. And in pathological narcissism, you need to be noticed. Your existence relies crucially on what we call external regulation. Feedback from the outside, input from others, regulates your moods, your emotions, your reactions, who you are, how you perceive the world, and so on. But how are you going to be noticed in a rapid news cycle with 2 zillion social media accounts, with cats and semi-naked people all around? How are you going to be noticed? Ostentatiousness. So you need to become ostentatious. You need to escalate your behavior. And the more atrocious you are, the more abominable and abhorrent and so on, the more likely you are to garner the attention that you need. This is, by the way...
I was going to say, just to let me remind people, I'm talking with Sam Vaknin, who's a professor of clinical psychology. So, Sam, just tell me, and from what you're saying then, if you have to escalate things to be noticed to such a horrific level, the media using lots and lots and lots of photographs, more and more and more and more and more, that surely feeds the monster.
Yes. Actually, both parties abuse the media, social media included, mainstream legacy media, social media, all forms of media, all forms of access. It's not only media, it's access. They abuse this to do something manipulative, and it's called projective identification. Projective identification is when I force my adversary or my enemy or another party, I force them to behave in a way which conforms to my expectations of them and also presents me in a good light. So if I expect you to abuse me, I will provoke you. I will push your buttons. I will escalate my behavior until you do abuse me. And that would confirm my position that you're an abuser. And that would also make me the good guy, because here I am being abused by you, being victimized by you.
And that's how they use, and that's how they would use those, the photos and the pictures and what have you, does what? Make them more, well, they are victims, but it makes sure that you can't ignore that.
There are no saints in this conflict. I think that the problem is that people define themselves as victims. Victimhood is an identity. Being victimized is a series of events and behaviors or misbehaviors. It doesn't make you a victim. It means that you have been victimized. Victimhood is a totally different thing, because it involves entitlement at the expense of another person. And of course the media are harnessed and leveraged and used and abused by all the parties. These are signals. This theory is known in psychology as signaling theory. the parties are signaling to each other via the media and use the media in order to induce and modify the behaviors of the other side in a way that would reflect well on them and would confirm their prejudices and biases regarding the other side. And this is a form of aggression which involves gaslighting, the alteration of reality in counterfactual ways, and also involves projective identification. I'm going to make you do what I want you to do, what I want you to do.
I was going to say, where does anger is, I mean, not just anger from the parties involved, but anger from all of those watching, from, well, let me say, like news commentators and what have you. Whenever I see shouting and anger around this, it's a horrific issue, but whenever I see colleagues in the media shouting and angry, I see that as them fueling the flames. Am I wrong?
I would beg to differ with the word anger. Not your fault, by the way. It looks like anger. It's righteous indignation. It's a form of virtue signaling. Yeah. It's ostentatious. It has nothing to do with real anger. Because you see, real anger is a good thing. Real anger is a way to affect your environment and to modify other people's behaviors so that you won't have to be angry anymore. This is not anger. This is victimhood, self-righteous, sanctimonious, 100% good, while the other party is always 100% evil.
Okay, we've got to take a break. I'm going to come back and talk with you more. I'm talking with Sam Vaknin, Professor of Clinical Psychology. Back with more in just a moment. Welcome back and thank you for joining me. I'm having an absolutely fascinating conversation with Sam Vaknin, who is a renowned international professor of clinical psychology, usually based in Israel. As we heard, he can't get back there. He's in Macedonia at the moment. Sam, coming back to when you've got two parties who see that almost as a competition of who can be the biggest victim, what is the answer then? How do you create peace when you've got two traumatized, as you explained, the Jewish people with their trauma, the Palestinians with their trauma? How you can't do therapy for hundreds of thousands of people. And as we said before, those people who have tried to create peace and become close to it get assassinated. I mean, historically, it seems that governments, peoples go back to, and you said you made that point, the leaders that mirror their grief. Hamas became a political party, but still always have that. It's like the IRA when Sinn Féin. It's like with people forget that Nelson Mandela came from a once terrorist organization. So you've got the Jews with Bibi Netanyahu coming back. The Jewish people, yet he gets back again. You've got Hamas. How do you? What is the answer? What is the answer? You can't do therapy for hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people. What is the answer?
The situation calls for pessimism. However, there are two mitigating circumstances or mitigating aspects. We distinguish between cultures and societies which look to the past and cultures and societies with a future orientation. Now, the cultures and societies in the Middle East, the Arab world, the Jews, they are past-oriented. Their nourishment is based in the past, not in the future. They derive their sustenance, their strength, their resilience, everything from the past. So this is the first thing. If we succeed somehow to change this orientation and to render it present or future orientation, I think this would go a long way towards kind of pacifying both peoples.
But where does that come from? I was going to say, because the traditions, everything about both Islam and Judaism, the traditions, everything is, as you say, how you map out your day, your week, your month, your year is based in the past. To change that orientation, does that come from their faith basis? Does that, I mean, if somehow you could approach, we had earlier on a fantastic imam and a rabbi who have come together and are supporting each other and seem to be speaking of the future. So is that possibly where that focusing and basing themselves on the future, is that a place from which it could come?
Past orientation has to do with what we call learned helplessness. The belief that everything is hopeless, that regardless of your best efforts, you will never be efficacious. You will never accomplish long-term goals. And everything that you do accomplish is transitory and meaningless. So if we were to establish an environment, and here the Western world has a major role, as does China and so on, if we were to establish an all-encompassing environment, which incorporates both the Arabs and the Jews, in a way that guarantees them stability and safety and long-term prospects and economic development and jobs for all, etc., I think the hopelessness and helplessness will abate. And with these, the past orientation will be replaced with a future orientation.
The second thing, ask. It's a big ask because we're talking about territories.
It's been done before. For example, the Marshall Plan in Europe.
Yeah.
It's been done before in Japan after the Second World War. The United States is spending $6 billion a year in the Middle East. This money on weapons, mind you, only on weapons. I mean, take this money and use it differently. Same money. No need for appropriations. No need to negotiate with the Republican Party. Same money. So this is the first thing. The second kind of ray of light, hope, is the fact that societies in the Middle East, Jews included, are shame-based, reputation-based. The social control is exerted and channeled through shaming people, humiliating them, criticizing them in public, damaging their reputation irrevocably. So these are the levers of social control. Now, this is very bad because you need to save face. And in order to save face, you act irrationally. Like it's save face or die. Liberty, liberty or death. So saving face or death. That's it. Literally, people are willing to die to save face. If we were to transition from a reputation and shame-based society to a society of rule of law, objective and neutral measurements and evaluations, a society that doesn't shame people or humiliate them, but teaches them and educates them and nurtures them, then I think we will have removed another component of this seemingly endless and intractable conflict. You see, this is the cycle. This is exactly the cycle. The Jews live in the past. The Jews live in the past. The Palestinians live in the past. Both of them have been shamed and humiliated. Now the Hamas humiliated Israel, shamed Israel. Is Israel acting rationally? Allow me to have my doubts. Is Israel acting proportionately? Almost for sure it's not. Why? Because Israel has to save face. It has to restore its deterrence and the respect and the awe that it used to be held in. It's all about reputation. It's exactly like the mafia, exactly like a mob mentality,
And I guess you could say the same about Hamas. They had to save face. Everybody's saying. Do you think it's time? We've got to finish this interview, but part of me thinks isn't it time that women took over? I mean, I say that glibly, but so much of it is bound up in the sorts of things I guess we attribute to men: saving face, muscle, might, aggression. Those are attributes that are very male. We're talking maybe about societies in which the man has a role that many would say is adhering more to the past, because younger people, as we've seen on both sides, don't adhere as much to that. So part of me thinks maybe it's time for the world to have a good go at women running it. I mean, can we do much worse? I don't mean to joke.
This might be true in the West, but regrettably in these areas, in the Middle East and so on, there is full collaboration between men and women in perpetuating this state of affairs. Women have been co-opted. Women have been co-opted into the male patriarchy, basically, into the male structure.
Well, Sam, thank you as always. It's fascinating talking to you, and I really I send you my warmest wishes. It must be. I know it's going to be a very, very difficult time for you.
It is
as well.
Thank you for your sentiments.
And thank you. I mean that, because all of our guests that we've had from the area, I'm like, God, how you lack of sleep and the churning of stomachs and all of those things going on, and even be able to focus or gather their thoughts. It's not something that I take lightly. So I do thank you again.
I want to say one last thing. This is a crisis, definitely, but it's also an opportunity. In 1973, Israel has been surprised. There was a surprise attack on Israel by Egypt and Syria, and it led 4 years later to peace. Peace with Egypt, later peace with Jordan, and so on. This horrible atrocity committed by the terrorist organization Hamas could be an opening. It doesn't need to end this way. You could reconceive of it and reframe it and leverage it to make peace. Unfortunately, I don't see the leadership there to do this on either side.
It's sad. Sam,
It is.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. We'll definitely be talking with you again. I know we will be in the future. Professor of Clinical Psychology, Sam Vaknin there, as you heard, he's Israeli, can't get back to Israel because there aren't any flights. So he's in Macedonia at the moment. Lots to think about there, We're going to take a quick break, and after that, we'll be back on a totally different subject. Our I Believe segment, where we hear from a herbalist. Back with that in just a moment.